When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel, and today's video is going to be our reread and a little bit of a change of the visuals. I kind of hinted at this on my community page on the channel. So again, for anyone coming in and just wanted to shake things up, wanted to make things look a little bit better, maybe not make it like look as kind of plain as it was before. And I was someone that was really struggling on finding decent images for the backgrounds to these rereads. So I decided to just kind of update it. Say just screw it. Go with more of a, I don't know, more of a home feeling, right? Have the like campfire going on the back while we go through these rereads, and just have some things visually up so you guys know, oh, you just click on the video. Maybe you just skipped over a part where I was explaining where we are. You can look at the screen. You kind of know where we're at. So that kind of leads us to getting to the chapter. Also, let me know what you guys think. You know, if you guys have any feedback, if you think maybe some things don't work or you like it, just let me know down in the comments and I'll adjust it for whatever you guys like. But yeah, just a little bit of a thing here, especially for people watching on YouTube, but this is much of a Spotify thing, but all these things will change, right? So when we have a Catelyn chapter, the image in the bottom right of your screen will be like a Catelyn like profile picture, and then the top left will always just be some kind of image that is represented in this chapter. And so, yeah, this chapter is going to be Ned 10, A Game of Thrones. So just so you guys remember, the last we had of Ned was the scuffle with Jaime, and Ned has been in a pretty bad state. A horse like fell on his leg. He hasn't been able to walk. He, again, on his journey back to King's Landing, when he's being transported, he was like falling in and out of consciousness. And we now know that he's actually been kind of asleep for a very long time. But that'll kind of get us into where we're going to pick up here in Ned 10. We're going to be inside of Ned's head in a dream in one of my favorite Ned chapters in the Tower of Joy sequence. So starting on page 422, Ned begins the chapter with thinking of the events at the Tower of Joy. How the tower had been knocked down, Lyanna dead in her bed, and the three Kingsguard with their white cloaks. Again, painting a very dreary image where it's interesting because you think of the name, the Tower of Joy, and something Ned's going to think about in this chapter is that the Tower of Joy really didn't bring him any joy. It brought death, it brought pain, suffering, things that Ned would have to account for later. And this chapter is really going to focus on really a lot on what happened with Lyanna and what happened with the Kingsguard and what you think happened there. So this could go a number of ways. I'm going to give you guys what my thoughts are on them. But again, very much subject to change depending on who you are. But in Ned's companies were his old friends. They numbered 7 against 3. Interesting because I noticed this is a very religious number, right? You look at 7, when you look at a trial by 7, just a very religious number when it comes to the new gods specifically. Now, alongside Ned was Howland Reed, Lord Dustin, Mark Risewell, Martin Cassell, Jory's father, Ethan Glover, and Theo Wool. So a lot of very notable names and houses here, a pretty good party of people. He had known their faces like his own, but the time has sapped his memory of them. And I think this is just natural, right? If we think about Westeros, this is a period where there's no photography, there's no way to really keep their images outside of maybe paintings, right? That's kind of how a person will live on. So if we look at Robert Baratheon, for instance, the tapestries Littlefinger's trying to get in the normal story, it becomes kind of interesting as you age. You'll kind of forget maybe what those people look like, maybe not how they acted or things like that. I find myself sometimes when I recount people from when I was younger that maybe are not alive anymore, you know, I can still kind of remember their faces, but looking at actual details, and that's something that's only going to get worse as like I grow older. I'll start to maybe forget more of those people. And that's something that I think Ned is kind of dealing with here as well. But he notes that even now, he can see the three Kingsguard as vividly now as back then. He notes Arthur Dane with his great sword drawn over his shoulder with a sad smile on his lips. Oswell went on one knee, sharpening his blade, and the old Lord Commander, Gerald Hightower, the White Bull. A very formidable three men here, all very important in vastly different ways. If you're someone like me, I think Oswell Went is someone that is very pivotal, I think, in the establishment of Rhaegar and Lyanna's relationship as well. You look at the Gerald Hightower, who, again, very important, is one of the most legendary Kingsguard. And then you have Arthur Dayne, one of the greatest fighters in all of A Song of Ice and Fire history. And his significance, we're not even completely sure going into the main story on House Dayne as a whole and what his sword Dawn may represent in the future. But that'll move us into page 425. So moving on, Ned says he looked for them at the Trident, and Geralt says we were not there. Oswell continues, woe to the usurper if we had, which I think is actually really an interesting sentiment here, because if all of these men had been with Rhaegar at the Trident, would Robert have ever actually gotten to Rhaegar? That's what's very interesting. There's so much we just don't know about the Trident. Like, what were Rhaegar's motivations? Was he someone that actively, maybe just like Robert, was trying to get to Robert to kill the rebellion in its tracks there, which is something I think is very likely, right? That you would see Robert and Rhaegar meeting on the battlefield because they both had the same motivation. They both wanted to end either the resistance or the loyalists just like that. And if someone like Arthur Dayne had been around, this fantastic swordsman alongside of Barristan, who was gravely injured at this battle, I think there's a logical idea that maybe Robert doesn't even get to Rhaegar, that some of his Kingsguard may have even dealt with Robert before that happened. So again, it is one of those mistakes where you look at, okay, Rhaegar prioritized, having people protect Jon or whoever this baby is that you think it is, or maybe there's not even a baby here, but whatever, over putting down Robert, the real threat to the realm. And that's something that, again, goes into the whole idea of Rhaegar and how he was so certain that they were going to win Robert's rebellion because maybe prophecies going on and other things, and how Rhaegar was just kind of a sure, confident person. Ned then says that he wondered where they were when Aerys was slain by Jaime with a golden sword. Geralt, also, I hope I'm saying his name right. I know people pronounce his names differently, but that's just how I'm going to pronounce it. Geralt says, far away, or Aerys would still sit the throne. Again, showing, I want to point this out, how loyal these men are to Aerys. They know Aerys is not a good king. Even when, again, Rhaegar is dead. At this point, these men still would have backed Aerys to the death. That's something that's important to understand when we look at the motivations for, again, if you're going off the idea that these two sides did actually fight and the three Kingsguard were slain and Ned's men were slain, most of them anyway. This is really pivotal to understand because they were willing to die even for a cause that maybe would have been lost or was even bad. And that's something we kind of talk about with the loyalist forces, like the forces that were fighting for, say, Rhaegar or the Mad King. Like, how do you rationalize what their motivations were, what the common person was thinking during Robert's Rebellion, is something that's very fascinating to me, because the average person would have seen this as, okay, Aerys is not a good king. He's very violent, destructive. He's kind of mad at this point. He has a bad reputation. Tywin, who was kind of the person that was responsible for most of the best times during Aerys's reign, is sitting out the war. And then you have Rhaegar, who it seems like he kidnapped Lyanna and is lusting after her, cheating on his own wife and their two children and kind of leaving them. Again, the motivations were definitely higher on, say, the common person for Robert than they were for Rhaegar and the Loyalists. So I thought that was something just interesting to note here. And why I'm putting such an emphasis on it is when we look at this idea of why would Arthur Dayne, why would Oswell Went, why Gerald Hightower would fight, this is the last Targaryen in their eyes, right? With Dany and Viserys fleeing, this is the last Targaryen at this point that they believe. And so you can make the argument that also Jon is the heir to the throne, right? He is Rhaegar's son. That would put him in the highest line of succession. And when you have, again, this point, I'm kind of like going through this whole thing without going in chronologically how it is in the chapter. But the point here is that Ned is the best friend of Robert Baratheon. Robert Baratheon has shown that, one, he does not like the Targaryens. He wants to kill all of them. He is okay with the killing of babies with Aegon and Rhaenys, or Rhaegar and Elya's children. He is someone that killed Rhaegar, someone that all of these men like. So what is their perception of Ned going to be? Well, Ned kind of sat by and supported this, even though he may not, like what's happening. They don't know that information, that Ned and Robert are not on good terms at this point. They do not know that. And so the issue is, okay, how would we then, even if, again, Lyanna is related to Ned, how do we turn over this baby when we don't know what Ned is going to do with him? And that's the biggest point here that I think we have to look at as we go through here, the motivations of why the Kingsguard would want to fight Ned or have some reason to do so. Their minds, I think, in their opinion, were already made up. If anyone came to this tower, they were going to fight. They had already figured they were probably going to die. Ned then says he went to lift the siege at Storm's End. Sure, he would see them there, but that was not the case. Also noting that the Tyrells and Redwynes bent the knee, but Arthur notes, our knees do not bend easily. Again, pointing to this idea that they were kind of steadfast in their position. And something else I want to point out is, I find it very surprising that Ned, I guess, given the circumstances that the Kingsguard were gone and they weren't really being found anywhere else, you would think maybe they were at the siege, but it doesn't seem likely. Some of the best Kingsguard being just at this siege with the Tyrells doesn't really make a lot of sense. But given all the possibilities where they could be, I guess it is a rational conclusion from Ned. Ned then notes that William Derry fled with Viserys and your queen, and he thought they may have sailed with him, which again, I think that's kind of likely. Sir Oswell notes that William is a good man and true. But Gerald Hightower then notes that not the Kingsguard. They do not flee, then or now, Arthur adds, as he dons his helmet, which tells us a few things. They believe there is really no words that can solve this. Which, looking at this from their POV, like I talked about, Robert is okay with all of these things, killing innocent children that are Targaryen, his steadfast hatred of the Targaryens, and you also look at the personal motivations from these men, especially someone like Oswell went, and again, someone like Arthur, who are vast friends and very good friends with Rhaegar. This is the man, like the person Ned helped put on the throne, killed that guy, Rhaegar. This is now Rhaegar's child, and they are not going to stand down. And so I think it makes a lot of sense that we just go to extremes. Like, there's no words that is going to sway the Kingsguard to give up protecting this child. Maybe Ned could say, oh, I'll do this whole plan that what she ends up doing if you're an R+L fan. I'm going to do all this. But how do these men now trust Ned? They can't. There's nothing that can justify or rationalize why they would trust him. And so that's kind of my idea with that whole idea. Gerald says they swore a vow. What vow this is probably, in my opinion, the idea to protect Rhaegar and Lyanna's child and Lyanna herself, and probably to not let anyone take him. Ned then approached sword in hand, and Arthur Dayne says, and now it begins, unsheathing Dawn, which was a blade pale as milk glass and alive with light. Again, kind of maybe this idea of playing on the idea that Dawn could be Lightbringer, giving that it is alive with light. Now, something that does appear to actually be missing here is the idea of heat. This is something Aemon kind of talks about when looking at Stannis' fake Lightbringer, is that there was no real heat coming from it, and that doesn't really appear to be the case here at this point, at least for Ned anyway. Maybe he wasn't close enough to it or anything like that, but yeah, I think that is one thing that maybe we would call missing if you wanted to say that this is Lightbringer. Ned then responds, no, now it ends, and the two sides come together, all the while Ned hears Lyanna calling for him. Ned notes in the dream that a storm of rose petals blew across a blood-streaked sky as blue as the eyes of death. Again, just marking here that Lyanna's signature thing is these rose petals that are blue. That's kind of like her thing, right? It signifies kind of her death. It's a flower that she liked during her lifetime, and it's really just, again, pointing out this idea of Lyanna's death. And it's something we're also going to connect later on when we get to Dany's dreams, or Dany's prophecies, when we get to the House of the Undying later in the second book. That's going to connect to this and why I am just steadfast R+L guy, because there's a lot of parallels, and because there's a lot of evidence, especially in this first book, especially with this chapter specifically, that kind of point to the idea of Jon being R+L. So again, if you're not a fan of R+L, I'm sorry for, going that far in for my side, but this is just a chapter that I think points to a lot of those ideas. And then we get to this point where Lyanna made him promise. And Ned said he promised, and then was awoken by vain Poole. So a very emotional scene here where we get this battle of the Kingsguard and Ned's men, and we get this idea of Lyanna on her deathbed making Ned promise something. And there's just so many things where it's like, okay, well, what is Lyanna making Ned promise? And it just seems clear to me that she was making him promise to protect her child, well, whoever you believe that is. For me, that is John, and to make sure Robert didn't get his hands on him. That's kind of how I view this. Again, you can view this in other ways. Maybe you think this is young Griff or something else, and trying to make it to where he is hidden, maybe, again, taking him to Dorne and all that ends up happening or something like that. Yeah, there's just a lot of things you can kind of bring off of that line, but that is just my interpretation. So page 426 is what we will get into next. So Ned asks how long he has been out, but also notes the pain running from his side to his leg. Poole tells him he has been asleep for 6 days and 7 nights, as Poole offers him water for his thirst. Now, this is very significant, and I think you can understand why Ned kind of has a bit of a panic here, because think about what is going on, right? Ned is getting further and further to the secret of the parentage of Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen. He's getting more and more evidence that's getting more interesting, right? Ned is getting closer to his goal of finding out what happened. You have, again, in the world right now, Jaime has left the capital. He's amassing an army in the Westerlands. We see that Catelyn has taken Tyrion. There's a lot of things that Ned has missed out, and a lot of time that could have been spent preparing for some of those things. Poole continues stating that Robert has given orders to see him once he was awoken. Ned responds on the morrow, as he was still weak and the dream had left him in a weak state. Again, it's something that Ned does not want to revisit, right? It's a memory that's very dark for him. It's dictated a lot of the actions that he's had to make further in life, and this big lie that he has had to keep, whatever lie you think that is. And so that is kind of torn at him mentally, but also physically he's in a weakened state as well because of his leg. Poole responds saying that Robert has ordered you to speak with him the moment your eyes open. Once again, showing Robert's impatient and how the situation is getting dire between the factions. That this cannot wait, right? Robert wants to settle this now. He doesn't want this to get out of hand. Ned then asks for his captain of the guard be sent to him, almost saying Jory, but he remembers that Jory died. Alan steps into the room, and Ned asks him about the state of things since he has been out for a week. Alan tells him that Jaime has fled the capital and is on his way to Casterly Rock, and that the story of Catelyn, which up to this point had kind of just been something that a lot of people with informants would know, or maybe Ned knew, is now on everyone's lips. Everyone knows about Cat capturing Tyrion. Ned then asks about his daughters, and Alan says Sansa has been praying and that Arya is restless, not saying a word but being extremely angry. Ned tells Alan whatever happens, they must be kept safe, and he believes this is only the beginning, which Ned is correct on. It's not going to go how he thinks it's going to go, but he is right. And again, I think this parallels the idea of who Sansa and Arya are. As Sansa is someone that, again, still believes heavily in the gods. She takes after a lot after Catelyn, and so she uses that. She tries to take, I guess, the more politically correct route, whereas Arya kind of takes the Stark route, where it's more of a brooding. It's more of that anger that's overcoming Arya that's so prevalent in her character when it comes to the idea of her revenge arc and things of that nature. But that will get us to page 427. So moving into page 427, Alan stakes his life on it that nothing will happen to them, and Ned asks about his fallen men. Alan states he has given them to the Silent Sisters to be sent north so that Jory could rest with his grandfather. Again, tying into this chapter, remember that Jory's father had actually been with Ned, and Ned notes this, that it would have to be with his grandfather because his father was buried in the south at the Tower of Joy, which is something that's very interesting. It's like, I get that it was a long way, but why couldn't Ned have just sent those men north? It does seem a little weird. I think Ned could have found, you know, some servants or anything. And I don't think it like goes around with his lie or anything. I don't think people would question Ned wanting to bring back his men north. Maybe it's because Ned was trying to avoid any attention, but like, how was he not going to get any attention, right? Arthur Dayne's dead. You have Oswald Went dead. You have Gerald Hightower dead. You have a lot of prominent northern people dead. Lyanna is dead. You're going to get questions. So I think it doesn't really make sense to me why he wouldn't bring them back. Maybe because the journey was so long that those, again, corpses would probably be very decomposed by the time they even made it north. Maybe that was what he was kind of thinking. But I do think it's an interesting idea. Ned again thinks how they'd been 7 versus 3, but still only 2 men had survived. Ned had torn down the tower to make 8 graves for the men. It was named the Tower of Joy, but it only brought back bitter memories. Ned saw it as a bad omen to be dreaming about this again. Again, I want to point something out, right? Like, Lyanna comes back north. Lyanna is not buried in the south, but again, that's just very interesting. It kind of shows Ned's priorities that like Lyanna needed to be brought back north, but all these other men, no. It's even more interesting when you think about something like Arthur Dayne. We know that Ned goes to Starfall. Why didn't Ned bring back Arthur Dayne's body? I just think there's a couple of interesting questions on how Ned kind of treats the dead and the deceased. Ned tells Alan that he has done well as Vanepool enters saying Robert has arrived and that Cersei is with him. Ned builds him up. Again, Ned does not want to appear weak, so he's going to try to use all of his strength to, at least in this state of being destroyed, basically physically and mentally, he wants to try and build himself up, not appear weak in front of someone like Cersei. And Ned even notes he had not thought that Cersei would come, but that did not bode well, and tells Poole to withdraw. None of the words spoken should leave this room. As the two enter, Ned notes how Robert had taken time to dress very richly, but was already drinking with wine in his hand, and Cersei came in with her tiara on. So again, we just see Robert continuing to be an alcoholic. We see him, again, I think the stresses of the situation being amplified and how Robert deals with those problems when it comes to drinking. Something I think is very prominent when you look at alcoholism or someone that is an alcoholic, you know, taking out your stress by drinking. And I think that's something that's very prominent in a character like Robert. Ned greets them but says he cannot rise. This is no matter to Robert and asks if he wants some wine. It is from the arbor. Ned says a little, but his head is still a bit dizzy. Cersei interjects here, saying he is lucky to still have a head. Robert tells her to be quiet and asks if Ned's leg still pains him. To which Ned says some, which is a lie. He just does not want to appear weak in front of the queen as his head is still swimming. So kind of a lot to kind of point here where it shows that kind of like Cersei is someone that doesn't really take Robert's crap. Like, she will to a certain degree in like public performances and things like that. Like, say for instance, the tournaments or things of that nature. She will kind of tolerate Robert, but in the situations right here where it's like it's just Ned, Robert, and her, she's willing to interject on Robert and again interrupt him, which is something that Robert, seeing as being the king, is something that, you know, he thinks probably shouldn't happen. The two don't have a good relationship. And yeah, I think the thing we're going to really look at here that Tyrion had talked about in the last chapter we had with him was Cersei is someone that's going to let her pride get in the way. And she's not going to understand how much the Lannisters can gain from the situation. That's something that kind of comes out of this, right? She does not take the opportunity here to understand what they could do and benefit out of this situation. Again, playing on this idea that the Starks captured Tyrion without any evidence and didn't even give him really a fair trial, right? This is the thing that doesn't end up like playing out, but if Tyrion was to make it back to King's Landing, there'd be a lot of questions there, right? The Lannisters could really push heavily for some justice being done on the Starks. Now with Robert being king, how would that work out? Again, there's a lot of questions, but Ned's position is very fragile at this moment. Robert says that Pycelle says it will heal clean, but at the same time frowns, showing how uncomfortable Robert seems, and says that he takes it, that he knows what Cat has done. Again, a lot of things are coming to Robert's attention at this moment, right? Catelyn taking Tyrion has just now reached his ears. we see, again, this whole situation with Jaime and Ned. Robert feels very uncomfortable because on one hand, he has, you know, Ned, who is family to him, the one he trusts probably more than anyone. But on the other side of it, you have the family that Robert's married into, and they're fighting. It's just a very awkward situation for Robert. And that's something that seems very apparent in the way George writes this chapter. Ned agrees, saying that everything Cat has done was under his command. Again, Ned taking responsibility for the actions of Cat, even though it's not even close to what Ned wanted her to do. Robert is not pleased with this, and Cersei, just like how Tyrion suggested in the last chapter, or his last chapter, suggested that Cersei takes insult to her pride, as she asks who Ned is to lay hands on her blood. See, the thing here is that Cersei doesn't really care that it's Tyrion that they took. It's that Tyrion's a Lannister. And it's the same idea with Tywin, right? Doing all of this work to start a war, more or less, because of the capturing of Tyrion. It's because of the Lannister name, not actually because of Tyrion. Ned, with ice in his voice, says, the king, or the hand of the king, ordered by Robert to keep the king's peace. Cersei says he was the hand, but Robert cuts her off, saying silence. Again, Cersei was just going to play on this idea that Jaime played on in the last Ned chapter, where Ned isn't the hand of the king right now, right? He lost that position. Robert notes, you asked him a question and he answered it, but still turns to Ned and says, you say keeping the peace, yet 8 men are dead. And again, I want to look at this from Robert's point of view. Like, people are dying. People are preparing to die. We are seeing a war almost kind of starting. This doesn't really seem like Ned is keeping the peace. Robert says he will have this reckless slaughter and kidnapping stop. Ned starts by saying Catelyn had good reason to capture him. But he is cut off by Robert, saying he will not have it. Return the imp and make peace with Jaime. Again, from Robert's POV, he actually is correct. Given what has happened, right? Catelyn really doesn't have a good reason to capture Tyrion. And this whole problem with Jaime and Ned is bad for the kingdoms. It's just this building up of a war and conflict leading to people dying. Robert is right, given the information he knows. Very important that he knows of what is going on. And even when we look at what we know of some of the characters, their actions have been wrong. And so Robert, I think, is really right here, trying to unify and create peace once again. Ned fires back, saying that what of Jaime, who butchered 3 of his men to chastise me? And Cersei defends Jaime, saying he was not the cause of this incident, as Ned came out of a brothel drunk and attacked Jaime. Which, again, we know this makes no sense. Robert's not going to believe it. This is Ned, right? Robert knows who Ned is. He wouldn't do that. But I think the more important part is, if we're going to say that Jaime needs to be punished, Catelyn should also be punished. Catelyn is the one that started this. Let's not forget that, right? Yes, Jaime is very impulsive. Jaime should not have killed these men just to basically give a warning to Ned and tell him to give back Tyrion. But Tyrion is also the one who broke the king's, or Catelyn is the one that broke the king's law and captured Tyrion on no proof, then brought him to the Vale to be a prisoner against his will when there was no fair trial really being given to Tyrion, and he was more or less being tortured given the conditions and his cell. So again, I think this is something that I see the Lannister side, and I see where Robert is kind of going with this, and I think Ned, this is one of those situations where the first time you read this, you're on Ned's side, but as a reader who's trying to look at this from a lot more different sides, I don't really think Ned has the right side of this, even though we know the Lannisters kind of are the bad guys in this situation. Ned says that Robert knows him better than that, and to ask Lord Baelish if he doubts him. Robert said he did talk to him, but Littlefinger said he rode off before the fighting, but did admit he was at a brothel. Again, this is really Littlefinger playing both sides, right? He's not going to give enough to be on the Lannister side, but he's not also going to kind of go against Ned. He's just going to kind of play that middle ground that he does so well. Ned then fires off, saying he was visiting your daughter, who is named Bara, and looks exactly like Maya in the Vale. The whole time while saying this, he watched Cersei, but her face revealed nothing. And that gets us into page 429. So, moving into page 429, Robert grumbled hearing this and says he thought she had more sense. Which is odd, given that the girl is 15 years old and a whore. What did Robert expect? This is not a higher educated, like, noble woman. This is, you know, a low-born woman who doesn't have a lot going on in her life. And now you have Robert, this kingly man who is, you know, treating her well. What did she expect? Or what did Ned or Robert expect? And that's exactly what Ned points out, that she is a whore and she's in love with you. The king looked at Cersei, saying, "This is no subject for the queen's ears." But Ned says nothing he will say will please her, as he asks for permission to bring back Jaime for justice. Again, weird, like, point here, because Jaime, in my opinion, is not the first person that did wrong, and Ned's just not seeing that. He's not really seeing why Robert is struggling with this conflict, because it's really Catelyn that started this, and that's the whole problem, right? When we talk about why Catelyn makes that decision to capture Tyrion, it is detrimental to Ned's position in King's Landing. It creates so many problems for him that he has to try and deal with. Robert thinks about it and says no, he wants no more fighting, and that you killed 5 of his men and 3 of yours. Let it end. Ned again is pissed and asks if this is what justice is, and he again confirms he is glad he is no hand to Robert. And again, Cersei at this point interjects, saying that if any man spoke like that to a Targaryen, but Robert cuts her off. That was not the thing to say, again, in Robert's presence. Robert does not like the Targaryens at all. He doesn't want to be compared to them. He doesn't want any of that. And Robert asks if she takes him for heiress. Now, one thing I want to point out here from Cersei's point of view, the way Cersei's pointing out this, not just like, oh, the Targaryens wouldn't have allowed this. It's more like the way she was, you know, raised by Tywin to not take slights to you, make the other person fear you and kind of have that power level over them. Ned is not playing that, right? Ned is not viewing Robert as this person with more power. He's viewing Robert kind of as an old friend that's making dumb decisions. And I think, you know, we've all had that moment where let's say you have a friend and you know they're making bad decisions, and you try to speak honestly to them and try to get it through to their head that this is not the right, you know, course of action. This is kind of what this reminds me of. But yeah, bringing up the Targaryens is the quickest way to make Robert get very angry very quickly. And Cersei continues poking the bear, saying she took him for a king, and that Jaime and Tyrion are her brothers by marriage, and Ned has captured one and driven off the other, which Cersei's not wrong, right? I know Jaime was the one that was impulsive, but he had to leave after that whole incident happens. It was too risky to stay in the capital. And so, in a lot of ways, Cersei has a very compelling argument. Lastly, that Ned dishonors him with every breath he takes, and you ask him about his leg and if he wants wine. Robert was growing more angry as his face darkens, and he tells Cersei once again to be quiet. Cersei could not control herself, and with a voice full of contempt, and says, "The gods, or what a jape the gods have made us. By all rights, you should wear the skirts, and me in mail." Again, so there's this idea, really, of this idea that Cersei kind of wants to be a man, right? She is someone that wants to be in a position of power. She wants to be the one that's respected, and women in this society just don't have a lot of routes to do that, right? A lot of their influence comes through their husbands. We talk about this a lot with Dany chapters, and I think Cersei really feels that. It's something we really get into a lot more with her chapters in Feast and kind of as we go forward with her and Tyrion's dynamic. But yeah, so again, playing on this idea, and Robert at this point has had enough. Gives Cersei a vicious backhand that had her stumbling, and already you could see where the bruise was forming. Cersei the whole time made no noise, but said she would wear this as a badge of honor. Robert tells her to wear it in silence, or he will honor her again, which is something I find intriguing. Robert does not want it to be compared to Aerys, but yet he does things and he acts in a manner that Aerys would act, you know, striking a woman. And I get it that Cersei is, you know, poking and playing on his anger, but this is a very not great thing to do from Robert. And I think this just goes and shows leaps and bounds of what the relationship has been like for years and years and years, and why there's such a contempt between the two. and all of that. But that will get us into page 430 and also the last page of the chapter. So in page 430, Robert then has Marin Trant take her away under the pretext of her being tired. Again, you don't want it to be known that you're hitting your wife. Not a good look, especially when you're the king. Robert reaches for the flagon to keep drinking. Robert says, "You see what she does to me, my loving wife and the mother of my children." Ned notes that all the rage was gone, but something took its place. Sadness and sorrow. Again, look, I think it's just Robert looking at his life. This isn't the woman he wanted to marry. His children are not like him in really any way. His life has not gone well. He doesn't like ruling. He's a drunk at this point. It's a very sad life to kind of look back on. Robert continues saying he should not have hit her, and that was not kingly, as he looks at his hands as if they were not his own. Again, showing that Robert doesn't really know what he's become as a person. He feels almost lost that he has hit Cersei. Robert notes he was always strong, but how do you fight something that you can't hit? Again, showing that Robert really suffers, I think, from this male stigma where men are not really allowed to have emotional conflicts. For all the people that, maybe watched my video, I talked about my journey with some of my mental issues. I want to say I appreciate all of you guys that took the time to watch that video, left really kind comments or anything to that degree. But one of the parts I talked about it is very similar to what Robert's talking about here. Like, how do you deal with emotions that you can't just attack? You can't maybe work through them. There's something that, is just a mental block in your head. And that's something that Robert is kind of trying to understand here. Robert continues saying that Rhaegar won. Yes, he killed him. He put his spike right through his breastplate, and Rhaegar died at his feet. That Rhaegar still won. He had Lyanna, and Robert had Cersei. But I want to note something that's very curious, that I think I'd never really thought about it until I listened to History of Westeros's video on Rhaegar's death. Something that's very interesting to think about is we always, again, my background image for this channel is like this legendary fight between Robert and Rhaegar on horseback. When we talk about that Rhaegar died at Robert's feet, it really gives this idea that, okay, how did this happen? Like, how did Robert actually kill Rhaegar? Was it one of those things where Robert knocked him off of his horse, or they'd been fighting and then bam, Rhaegar was lost? But then was it one of those things where Robert killed him at his knees? It's not as pretty as when you look at the background image I have for the channel, whether on horseback and such. But let me know what you guys kind of think about that whole idea. Ned says that we must talk, but Robert silences him, saying he is tired of talk. With his fingers on his temple, he says, "Whatever you have to say can wait. He is going hunting in the Godswood on the morrow." Ned says he will not be here on his return, as he was commanded to go back north. Robert, standing up, gives Ned the hand pin back and tells him, like it or not, he is the hand, and he forbids him to leave. Ned, still in pain, takes it, feeling helpless. He asks about Dany, but Robert shuts it down, saying, forget the girl, it is done, and he will have no more of it. Ned then asks why he would want him as hand if he won't listen to his counsel. But Robert says, why not? Someone must rule the kingdoms. As Robert says, it suits him, and if he ever throws it in his face again, he will give it to Jaime Lannister. So, this, unfortunately, will be the last chapter that kind of features Robert outside of kind of when he's dying. And it really is a big chapter because it kind of shows Robert's stained legacy, who he is as a person, and what has kind of led to the issues we're going to see throughout the story, right? Robert's children that aren't even his. And I really love this chapter. I'm not sure where I have it in the chapter rankings. I know I put it in the top 5. It's one of my favorites, just a personal favorite, with the Tower of the Joy stuff being fantastic. Robert, Ned, and Cersei's conversation is just, it's fantastic. And everything that this chapter does, building the conflict, this is one of those just really, really great chapters. It's a short chapter. It's not even that long. It's only like 7 or 8 pages, I think. But it is just fantastic. I can't wait to do my chapter rankings video by the time we're done with this book, and we're kind of getting there, right? We've only got, I think, about we're about almost 2/3 of the way into the book, so we're getting there. We've only got a couple more Ned chapters for the rest of the story, which is crazy to me. And so, yeah, let me know what you guys think about this chapter. I think for me, it's a personal favorite. Well, by the end of the story, it'll probably be a top 10 chapter. I don't know, though. We still have a lot of bangers, but still. Thank you guys all for watching, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Also, let me know what you guys think about the background, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.